You're watching Fugitive Red Eye, and welcome to another episode of Media Opinions. I know, 2 in 1 week, who'da thunk it? Now, today's episode was inspired by a YouTuber I've been watching called Rick Worley, and he does a lot of video essays. He's done a lot of things defending the Star Wars prequels, and poking holes in people's criticism, and defending George Lucas and George Lucas's vision for Star Wars. And while I don't agree with everything he says in those videos, and while I obviously wouldn't agree with him politically, for sure, on some things, because of stuff that he's hinted at here and there, his video essays have been a really refreshing and interesting watch, because he focuses mostly on the artist's vision when it comes to George Lucas, and why the special editions are good in his eyes, and things like that. Now, I guess before we get into the artist's vision, I will give my opinion on the prequels and the special editions, since I brought them up here at the beginning. I really like the prequels. I think they're flawed, but I think that they're actually really fun, and I do like the story, even if there are some issues with it. I do think that Rick Worley made a lot of good points about people's criticisms actually not making sense in some particular instances. For instance, people claiming that Jango Fett's head should have fallen out of his helmet when Boba picked it up, but you literally see his head fall out of the helmet right before that because of the shadow. Small little things like that. But I really do like the prequels, and as far as the special editions go, there's some changes I like, there's some changes I don't. Ultimately, I don't think they ruin the movie, but again, it's a mixed bag. I don't know that I'd go as far as to say the prequels are good movies, because they're certainly very, very flawed, but I do enjoy them and I like them. But that was a good jumping off point for why I wanted to talk about the artist's vision, because Rick Worley really hammers home the fact that Star Wars is George Lucas's vision, and how movies now don't really have visionary directors that have a movie that they're making for themselves. A lot of the times they're just corporate things where corporations will want to make a movie because something's popular and then they'll just throw a director on it and just have him direct. Whereas all of the best movies tend to have directors that are really attached to them. Obviously there are exceptions, there are good movies that get made by studios like that, but like Kubrick and Takeshi and Tarantino, all of them have visions and styles that they do, and their movies are their movies, where they are the ones at the helm. And the same was true with Star Wars and Lucas. Even the ones he didn't direct, he still had massive creative control over. And again, we're talking about the original 6, not the god-awful Disney abominations. But obviously I have very nuanced opinions when it comes to the whole fact of the artist's vision. I do think, at its core, all great art comes from a visionary artist. The best thing for a movie, book, piece of art just in general, is when it's done by someone who is making it for themselves with their own vision. At the same time, I am also one who is a big proponent of, death of the author and interpreting things my own way and things like that. So, obviously I'm not wholesale in saying that the creator is the only one who determines what something means to people, because obviously if that was the case, my interpretation of Watchmen wouldn't make a whole lot of sense, because again, I love Watchmen, but I despise Alan Moore and what he wanted to accomplish with it. But I do think art should be made for the purpose of the artist trying to get their vision out there, and I think that is, at its core, what makes great art. And Rick Worley did make some good points about the fact that Kubrick literally destroyed tons of different cuts of his movies and removed stuff constantly, and you never hear people demanding anything from that. Again, I am torn on this, because I do agree with the fan base in the fact that the fans are the ones who make something stay relevant, but on the other hand, that's not necessarily what the artist is going for. Obviously, I think that art should be done for the purpose of the artist and what they want to accomplish, regardless of what fans want or don't want. However, that will lead to some things being bad, because artists are humans too, they're fallible. But obviously I think that fans should gatekeep and things like that, hence the video we did a couple days ago about gatekeeping. And I ultimately do think that it is fair to call out when something doesn't make sense in a work you like. I do think sometimes Star Wars fans do go a bit overboard with George Lucas, because I do think that George Lucas really did put his heart and soul into all 6 Star Wars movies, and I genuinely do think that the 6 Star Wars movies as they currently exist is the way that George Lucas wanted them to be presented, with the special editions and everything. Obviously, as I said, personally I find the special editions to be a very mixed bag, but I do get that it is what George Lucas currently wants the movies to appear as. It's the way he envisions them now. And the changes he did in the special editions weren't done out of malice, they were done out of him wanting to improve the movie, regardless if that's what they did or not. That said, corporations will get cash cows and milk them and ruin things when they're not creative themselves. So I do think that is also a key difference when it comes to the sequels versus the prequels, because the prequels were still George Lucas making the movies he wanted to make that he cared about, whereas the sequels are absolute garbage. Now that said, I also do think that some people get ahead of themselves and want to be recognized when they shouldn't. Like, There's a lot of voice actors and stuff, in particular when it comes to anime, they get really entitled and will shit on the fans and talk bad about fans and be fucking assholes who think that they're better than us just because they voiced a fucking Japanese cartoon character. And if it's not abundantly clear, I'm talking about Funimation specifically, but I'm sure there's plenty of others because the whole industry's like that. Obviously, voice actors aren't artists either, so I do think that there is something to be said there. But I do think that even an artist should at least acknowledge and be grateful for the fan bases they gain. I'm not saying that they have to. Obviously, they don't owe us anything. And I do think it is wrong to also think that you're owed something by an artist just because they made something you like. Because they made it for them. Regardless if they make more or less or did things you didn't like, that's irrelevant. They made it for them, which I think is admirable. And if it's someone who's truly someone who wants to stick to their art and their vision, I respect the hell out of that regardless of the result. And I definitely have never had, like, a massive fan base myself, so I don't know what that's like either, so I don't know how frustrating that could be if you're constantly getting hounded for shit like that. Obviously, I think if you put stuff out there, you should be willing to deal with it. But at the end of the day, I think that the artist's vision is what matters when they're making art. I do think fan bases have just as much right to criticize and reinterpret things as well. So that's where the nuance comes in. Again, I think that there is nothing wrong with criticizing Star Wars, criticizing the prequels, because again, they are very flawed movies. There's nothing wrong with criticizing the special effects changes that George Lucas did in the original trilogy later on, because again, some of them are pretty bad. Like I said, it's kind of a mixed bag, but there's definitely some bad things in there, like the CGI Rontos and stuff that they threw in, which just doesn't blend well with the original look. But again, in Rick Worley's video, he actually pointed out that even in '77, there were multiple versions of the movie, because there was the test screening version, there was the mono version, the stereo version, the 35mm version, the 70mm version, all of which had very slight differences in them, way before they actually did the remastered ones. I do think some of those could just be splitting hairs, and obviously the special editions are the ones where they completely overhauled and introduced some of the less than good changes, to say the very least. But there are some changes I think are good. For instance, replacing the Emperor with the actor that he's played by in all the other movies in Empire Strikes Back, because originally it was just a random actor. Or I think the scene with Jabba in A New Hope was actually really cool, because that was originally recorded back in '77, but they didn't have anything to put in that place. So yeah, like I said, I think that fan bases have every right to criticize and have their own interpretations and opinions of things. Obviously, I think those fan bases should gatekeep to keep things pure. But I also think that at the end of the day, the artist's vision is what matters the most when the artist is making work. And that may or may not off-put fans when they put it out, but you know what? That's the way that art works. Anyway, I think that's really all I have to say. I would recommend you guys check out Rick Worley's channel. I've actually been enjoying him quite a bit lately. Like I said, throughout his videos, it's pretty clear that I would disagree with him on some details, but he's a pretty good content creator, and I've enjoyed his videos quite a bit. Anyway, this has been Fugitive Red Eye. Have a good one. Toodles.